Welcome back to Living in Mexico. I'm Ana Maria Salazar. Thank you so much for joining us. Other big news this week was the fact, and this is, it's still unclear what this means, and I'm hoping the following guests will help us understand. But this week, on Constitution Day, de febrero, President Manuel Lopez Obrador sent to Congress a very extensive packet of constitutional reforms to be discussed, and in it's not too clear what the expectations of the president is, but clearly he wants to talk about these reforms every day, and he wants the legislators to talk about these reforms. I'm still not clear which of these reforms that was presented has any possibility of being approved. But of course, today's guest, I'm hoping, will help us understand what this all means. Carlos Ramirez, you know him well. He's from Integralia. I was just going over a report that you all had published, Carlos, and it is still amazing how huge this legislative packet is. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Ana Maria. It is huge, and it is highly unusual because we are in the 6th year of President Lopez Obrador administration. Usually, historically in Mexico, the last year of a president is basically a year of muddle through, finishing some projects, inaugurating some little projects around, whatever. But it is not a year typically in which a president presents 20 or 18 constitutional reforms in one single day. So that's the first thing to note. The second thing to note is that we are 3 months and a half away from Mexico's presidential election. So very likely, very possible, there is a link between what President Lopez Obrador presented this week with what is going to happen in 3 months and a half. So
now, yeah, I mean, let's just remind our audience where we are on the campaign process, because technically the candidates are not supposed to be campaigning, formally. But so it's also been very interesting that the one who has the focus of the media and the attention of the media is the president. And of course, there's all these other scandals, and we talked about last week about this report by Tim Golden with some experts, but putting that all aside, you know, there's a lot of violence in the country. There's a lot of questions in regards to the president's strategy. But with these proposals, you know, we have to talk about these reforms, because maybe you can help me and our audience understand how many of these actually have any possibility of being approved.
Yeah. Many of the 18 reforms don't have any possibility of being approved. Let us recall that the president, his party, does not have a constitutional majority in both chambers. So he basically knows and understands that most of these constitutional reforms will not be approved. So there is probably something else behind all this. Right. It is part of a strategy, as you mentioned, to gain attention during the intermediate period between where both candidates, or the 3 candidates for the presidency in Mexico, cannot campaign. So he's cleverly jumping into the arena and gathering more attention into his project. That's what probably is behind all this. Now, as you mentioned it's very important to look at the reforms, because they are not something we can ignore. They are very serious reforms. I would say that they are both economic and political reforms, and we can go through very quickly through some of them, but clearly there are reforms that if approved, or if approved now, or maybe later, that's something we can talk also about. They could be dangerous for Mexican democracy and Mexican economy. So yeah, clearly this has a lot to do with distractor.
Let's let's talk about those reforms that concerned you the most.
Yes.
Even though it appears that it's very unlikely that they would be approved. I mean, the one that we've all been talking about is this idea or this proposal that judges will be elected, will face elections, including justices on the Supreme Court. And of course,
Yeah.
everybody seems to be appalled, but the president loves to talk about this, and he thinks it's a really good idea.
Yeah, he thinks it's a good idea because he understands very well that if this reform was approved, he would basically control the Supreme Court, right? Which is basically the intention behind this thing about electing the ministers of the Supreme Court. This doesn't happen anywhere in the world except with Venezuela and Bolivia, and clearly it's an intention to capture the court. So that is a very serious reform, very dangerous for Mexican democracy, the potential capture of the Supreme Court. But there's others. The second one, the electoral reform he's proposing, he already had in the past presented an electoral reform, was rejected by Congress. Now he sends another bill, but this one is even more dangerous because he wants to basically disappear the deputies of proportional representation. Today, Mexico has 500 deputies. 300 of them are elected directly, and 200 of them are elected through proportional representation. He wants to disappear 200 proportional representation deputies. That means that the bigger party in the country, which is Morena, would be would have an enormous advantage over the rest of the smaller parties, which means that basically Morena could basically win all the next elections probably for the next 30 years.
Well, and of course, it would make it easier for Morena and these proposals to be passed by Congress and by the Senate.
In the
I mean, they
future.
would have absolute control.
Yeah.
It seems unlikely that this will be passed.
Unlikely. And it is unlikely also, the third one, which is also very dangerous, that has to do with the disappearance, the elimination of several institutions, let's call them horizontal institutions in Mexico, institutional framework, basically the competition commission, the ones that is in charge of bringing more competition to markets. He wants to disappear it. He wants to disappear the agency that measures poverty in Mexico. Why? Nobody knows. Basically, probably he wants government to take control back on that measurement. He wants to disappear the National Transparency Institute, which has basically allowed 8 million Mexicans to get to know more about what the government does in the past 15 or 20 years. These horizontal institutions have been very important for Mexico, let's say, checks and balances in the past 2 decades, and he wants to basically disappear them. That also has very low probabilities of approval.
That's what I was going to say. And his justification of disappearing these organizations or these institutions is that the money would be used for another proposal among sources of funding for a pension plan or a reform to the pension system. What is that about?
Yeah, so let's move now. There's other political ones, but I think that these three are the most relevant. Now let's move to the economic reforms. The most taught about reform right now is pensions. President Lopez Obrador did a relatively good reform in 2020 on pensions. He basically increased the amount of money that goes into the accounts of more than 65 million Mexicans that are saving for their future. He did that reform, but now, surprisingly, at the end of his administration, he wants to do another reform. And what he is proposing basically is that he wants to grant 100% replacement rate for Mexican workers. What does that mean? Pensions that are equivalent to your last salary of work. Okay, so if you were earning 10,000 pesos, the last 5 years of your your working time, you want a pension of 10,000 pesos. Well, that doesn't happen anywhere in the world, Ana Maria. But President Lopez Obrador is basically saying, I want all Mexicans to have that, and we're going to pay it through a collective fund that is going to be, let's say, there's going to be some money accumulated by the government, and slowly that money is going to grow and will pay for the reminder of the pensions that Mexicans, in order for them to get 100%. So if they get 60% today, they will get 100%, and the government will pay for the difference. The problem is that this collective fund doesn't have the money right now. It's too little money, and it's simply crazy to think that this is going to be fiscally possible in the next 2 or 3 decades, where Mexico is going to basically Mexico's population, 65 plus years, is going to triple in the next coming decade. So also very fiscally very dangerous proposal, but it's also there. It could have a possibility of approval. The opposition has already stated that they could support it. Why not? It's an electoral time.
Right.
And then there's a couple more that I am worried about. One has to do with President Lopez Obrador has this obsession with bringing back passenger trains. This is something
I'm not even sure why does it have to be a constitutional reform? He doesn't need a
it
constitutional
doesn't
reform.
have to be a constitutional reform, but he wants to make a statement. Forget about, let's say I mean, he wants to make a statement. That's why he wants to take all these bills to the Constitution, because many of them don't need a constitutional reform.
Right.
The passenger train thing is, he basically is ordering the companies that use the trains in Mexico to move goods and around Mexico. He wants to basically transform the trains to make them also passenger trains. And this is also something very delicate, particularly in a country that needs a lot to move a lot of goods, because for productivity and competitiveness reasons. And finally, just the last one, I think it's worth mentioning. He wants to put in the Constitution that for the next years, from here to forever, minimum wage in Mexico will increase at least the level of inflation of the last year. So let's say the inflation last year in Mexico was 5%. Next year, minimum wage will have to be minimum 5%. This is very delicate because it could have competitiveness issues. Obviously, it would put put restrictions into companies. They would need to increase wages every year on this basis, and this could become something also delicate for the Mexican economy in the next years.
But the opposition may approve this, right? They may vote in favor.
Yeah, that is something also that the opposition could end up approving. Yeah, I think the strategy the opposition is probably going to follow, that's what they have stated so far, is that they will look at every inch of the 18 reforms, okay? They already have stated that they will not approve any of the political reforms. But on the economic reforms, they are saying, okay, if the president is sending us something that is irresponsible fiscally, or it could have a negative effect on the economy, probably it's problem of the president, not problem of the opposition. And the opposition is in what they have stated so far is that they could go through with these bills.
So there's a couple interesting ones which I think are also interesting but dangerous. Has to do with this constitutional reform in which those who are being accused of certain types of frauds will automatically will be imprisoned without jail, which is going, I mean, that is very, very dangerous. Simply because, as we've seen in the last couple of years, the number of people who are being detained and not allowed to have bail because of these reforms has increased dramatically. And we've also seen that many of these people shouldn't have been detained.
Yeah.
They may be innocent. But he's decided to send a message that he's going to go against factureros, which is a way of charging services and getting a certain split from these government contracts, and there's a lot of fraud involved. So I think he thinks this is a good idea. I don't think it's going to be approved.
No, it's not going to be approved. It's not going to be approved. This basically fiscal terrorism. President Lopez Obrador thinks that with punitive laws on the fiscal side, that is going to bring more resources into the state coffers. But really, I mean, this is not going to be approved, clearly. So
what was the electoral reform that he was proposing? What's behind that?
The electoral?
Yeah.
So the electoral has three parts. One has to do with public financing of campaigns. President Lopez Obrador, very cleverly, now that he's the party in power that controls the budget, now he's saying that he wants to cut resources to political parties. Exactly what he said in the past when he was an opposition party and he needed the money. Now that he has the support of the state money, he doesn't need that, and he wants to cut that. That's one part. The second I already mentioned, disappearing the 200 deputies. And the third one is also very dangerous. He wants to change the National Electoral Institute from being an autonomous institution to being basically a government agency. Just as
in the past.
Exactly as in the past, Ana Maria. We Mexicans know how this worked in the past. The PRI controlled the elections, and basically that allowed everyone to make the PRI to stay in power 70 years with fraud all the time. It was until 1996 when the National Electoral Institute became independent. So now he wants to go back to that world of government controlling elections.
So, that is crazy. I mean, that really makes, between that proposal and, of course, judges having to be selected through an election process, I think is extremely dangerous. And there's a series of proposals that have to do with rights, like, animal rights, the right to have a clean environment, and to water. Is that the one where apparently GMOs would be involved? The prohibition of GMOs, is that what that's all about?
The prohibition of DMOs, I'm sorry?
GMOs, genetically modified.
Yeah, he also wants to basically take into the Constitution the prohibition of GMOs, which basically could hurt Mexico-US relations, right? Because we are now in the middle of a trade panel to decide if Mexico is violating the USMCA free trade agreement. And there's other reforms that, I mean, we have to mention them. Energy, electricity. President Lopez Obrador wants to go back, take back the 2013 energy reform and basically grant the CFE, the Mexican electricity company, all the power again. He wants to basically reduce the possibility of granting rights on mining, new concessions on mining, on water, on internet. The list is long.
There was this one last issue that I want to bring up with you, which is the big elephant in the room, which has to do with the National Guard. He keeps on insisting to make sure that the National Guard be linked, be completely under the control of Sedena, which would be the Ministry of the Army, and he's insisting, and he really wants this, and I don't think there's enough votes for that to happen, and of course that's going to create all kinds of existential anxieties in terms of what's going to happen to the National Guard in the next upcoming year, just in terms of resources and personnel. But let me ask you this: of all these proposals that are on the table right now, where is this going? I mean, how long is it going to be discussed? When are we going to know which ones are going to be approved? What do you think is going to happen? Just give us a timeline, because we have the electoral process formally supposed to start March 1st, right?
No, actually, the legislative process already started. On
Okay.
February 1, he presented his reforms on February 5th, and the bills are already in Congress, and they have been basically separated in different areas of the Congress, and they will start being discussed. So, what is the most likely scenario? My sense, Ana Maria, is that he's going to try to push for a vote on the 20 reforms by late April. Okay. He is going to open the door, President Lopez Obrador. He's going to say, okay, I'm open to listening to everyone, what they have to say about this long list of reforms. He's going to basically simulate a discussion. That's my sense. And basically by April 15th, we will start getting a sense on where this is going. My sense is that he will push for vote in the floor on between 15th of April and 30th of April in order for, because we are going to be in the midst of the campaigns, of the presidential campaign. So this is going to create a lot of noise. It's going to gain a lot of attraction. And obviously it's going to take attraction from the other side, the other part of the election. So yeah, I think it's going to happen between the 15th of April and 30th of April.
Carlos Ramirez from Integralia. It's always great to have you on the show. I really, really appreciate it.
Thank you very much, Ana Maria.
Thank you. We're going to go to commercial break. I'm Ana Maria Salazar, and you're listening.